say that it feels right.
What's up YouTube, it's the Blender, and today I wanted to go through my Mage build that I just finished going through the Tainted Grail Fall of Avalon, and I wanted to show you both the things that I did, the gear choices I made, and where that sort of leads and how to like basically push it. So without any nonsense or further ado, here we go. The first things, right, I wanted to cover is the gear and some of the choices, and I'll explain the things that I want to do and why I want to do them. Then we'll spec the character, right, and I'll show you things that or choices we make in here, and I'll explain why as we go through those. And then in the and I'll show you how the King Soul set up everything. I'll show you all this, right? And I'll explain as I go through each piece as to why I chose it and when I chose it. And so we're basically going to try and explain the character in progression of acts, from Act 1 and Act 2 and then Act 3, targeting I think around level 20 to leave or be somewhere around leaving Act 1, maybe I think Act 4 or to somewhere around 40 to be leaving Act 2, and then somewhere in the 60s for Act 3. So as you can see, my character is 69, and I do have one extra attribute point here. That is because what I do, I think I talked to a Menhir statue and got an extra attribute point at the cost of like health. There's also I think 2 different permanent buffs you can buy from a vendor or 2, right? So I will start with the gear, right? So I like to start here on the boots because I explain them a couple things, right? When I originally started out, right, I picked up the Waning Moon, right? If you don't know how to get the Waning Moon, there's plenty of guides out there, but basically you just need to make sure and go to your different druidic shrines and give them something. I always keep wolf pelts on me to be able to activate as many of these as possible while I'm going through, right? And if I don't have the piece of druid gear that I'm looking for in each act, right, I will specifically target these until I get it, right? I'm not sure if each one is, like if it's sequence based, where like this one will give you exactly this and this one will give you exactly a different piece, or if like you're always going to get the boots first, you're always going to get the neck second, or what have you, right? So I haven't tried that. I haven't like tested like the order, right, or where they all come from. I just do these every time I come by, and I get the items that I'm looking for that way. So Waning Moon is super good, right? However, I don't think it's as good as some people think it is, right? Specifically because when I started out and when I was playing my character, I originally started out with summoning to try and like pull my max mana down, right? And so I would have, I have 50 max mana, I'd summon 3 things, get down to 15 max mana, right? I'd try to be inside of that range, right? And to get this speed multiplier, and I didn't feel like I was moving 25% faster. And the reason I think that is because if you have max mana, if you have a decent amount, right? And then you summon like four skeletons to get down to 20%, right? This number changes. So I don't think max mana or summons count against your max mana. They do count as like taking away mana, but I don't think they count as having consumed mana that you had. So they basically reduce your max mana, right? So these are only activated by utilizing mana, right? So you would have to have something that, let's say, drained mana faster than you were able to regenerate mana, and that would create a negative, mana every second, right? Which then would drain this down, and then you'd get down to like, you'd sit at 1 mana, and then you would get these things, right? Which is basically, we don't want to do that for our mage, so that just doesn't make any sense. So I did use these, right? And they are still good because they do give a static 10% spell power, right? So they're probably the best early game boots that you get, right? And then as fast as possible, or as soon as possible, as soon as safely possible, right? You want to get the spell slinger stuff, right? I think it's just the best set early, and it will carry you basically entirely. You could just focus on that. I do mix and match it with I think the Battle Mage set, and I'll explain those pieces. But you're just basically getting rid of this 25% movement speed modifier that you're never going to really have, right? To get a 5% increase in spell power, right? So Spell Slinger was second, right? So pick up the Waning Boots, right? Or you get them from one of the Druid shrines on your way while you're playing naturally. Great, right? These are sort of what you're gonna pick up. You're probably gonna have Traveler Boots or whatever boots you have, right? If you then find Waning Moon, pick them up, put them on as quickly as possible. All right. The next thing, right, is we have our Spell Slinger, right? Now it's also possible that we won't have the endurance to put on the Waning Moon, right? And if we don't, that makes sense, right? We'll end up in Spell Slinger anyway. So if we manage to get the Spell Slinger before we get the Waning Moon, we don't need the Waning Moon at all. So Spell Slinger is second. It's the ideal, right, boot out of Act 1. And then eventually in Act 2, we make a decision, right, which allows us to get the royal gear, which effectively is our endgame gear, right? It's basically the endgame gear that we're going for. And so since we're moving towards that, right, we get the royal slippers, we put that on in the end, right? And even just flat, right? So this is 15% spell power. This is 5% spell power with crit, right? The problem here is that this is an Act 1 piece, right? And this is an Act 2 piece. And for whatever reason, there is a sort of like behind the scenes tier to where this will scale, right? This 5% power, when if we upgrade these, right, that will scale significantly faster than if we were to upgrade these. Right? If you upgrade these boots, I'm not sure what they go to, right? But it would be like 20%, right? Maybe 25%. If you upgrade these 5%, right, we'll probably get 50% by the time we get to 10 upgrades or something like that, something silly like that. So these just scale significantly better, right? Because they came later in the game, right? And they just have all the stats we want, because what we're doing is basically a pure caster, right? We did have summons in here. You can ignore those. I was playing around with them, right? Not suggested. But I basically only use 1 and 4 here, right? So this is my weapon, my damage setup, and this is my, oh no, I need to heal setup, right? And I haven't had to use this in a long time. If you know what these spells are, great. If not, we'll go over them in a bit. So yeah, boots move from in that trajectory, and that's sort of the theme across the board, right? Which is Breaches of the Waning Moon are great, right? These get outshined by the Spell Slinger because 20 max mana beats 10 max mana, and regen outside of combat. It's not really something we're worried about because our build doesn't really actually care about regenning mana outside of combat, because we're able to sort of forcibly regen it in combat, so we don't care. And then obviously it gets outshined by 10% spell power with 1% magical arc magic crit, which again, if we upgrade these, gets more spell power, gets more crit, right? And then I still have, right, on this character, right, I still have the Waning Moon gloves, right? Now, I had, right, before I did my crafting respec, right, I had 20, more mana than I had health, which means that I was getting 25% spell power off of these, right? Significantly outpaces these royal gloves, right? Which is which is what I thought, right? But if you upgrade these, if I upgrade these to +6, this is going to probably be somewhere around 10 or 12% spell power, and 15% isn't going to change really, right? Whereas these will go to 51%, right? They'll literally be double the glove, right? So if you're doing this setup, the thing I would say, right, is if you're trying to like level naturally, you're trying to move forward naturally, and you're not trying to do some sort of like cheesy, no, that's punny, make a whole bunch of cheese and sell cheese balls, right, and do a bunch of respecs into practicality in order to make money, so on and so forth. If you're not trying to do something like that in order to have enough money to just forget or that money exists in this game, and you're just trying to level naturally and go through it naturally, then don't upgrade your gear, which is nice, because these two relics are the only thing that I put in any of this gear, and you can see these pieces as we go through them. None of them are upgraded. You do not need to upgrade any of this, and it's all done on veteran, right? But none of these pieces have to be upgraded in order to get through it, right? And just to show, like on my quest, right, I'm in the last part, right? Basically this is all story part. There's almost no fights, right, or no real tests, right, of the character in there. And I'm 69, I'm definitely through it, right? So with that, you're looking at basically moving every time from Waning Moon, if you can get it, to the Spellslinger. As soon as you get it, Spellslinger just basically takes over. This chest being 30% is ridiculous, right? And then once you get the royal stuff, you move to that, right? And you'll probably have to mix and match that in order to stay in this light category, right? Because even with, like, I have reduced the weight of this royal gown down to 1, right? And that is where we're at, right? Royal breach is 0.5, right? Royal slippers 0.0. Moved the oracle 0.0, right? So depending on what gear you put on, if it's heavy, right, you could run over, right? So like if I don't weight reduce these royal gloves, I have to stay with the waning moons, right, in order to stay in that light category. And so that's sort of where you end up spending your money. But so I wouldn't do that until I had my end game piece or end game pieces, which I'm assuming are going to be these for most people. Then jewelry, right? I get right out of the asylum. We ran around there, picked up a plus health and a plus mana, and then right out of the beach, well, it's a little bit of ways, right? But off the beach in the miners tunnels, you can get a perilous orb +1. You have to go pass through, like there's a hidden rock you have to break, or one of the rocks on the walls, right? You break that, and then it's in a crate. I forget if you have to lockpick it or not, right? But it's in a crate there. And then the perilous +2 is on one of the bridges. You take the wooden scaffolding on the left, and you go down there. And again, there's a box there that you either lockpick or don't, right? But it's in that box, and that'll get you 12% crit just off the rip, right? And then on your amulets, you have a couple options, right? If you haven't gotten the Archdruid's amulet yet, or in this case would be the Amulet of the Waning Moon, right? If you haven't gotten that yet, then I highly suggest going and getting Colms, right? And I would probably target him first and go get him first, right? I actually killed him with blood transfusion, right? And just bled him to death, right? It's a painstaking process, but early game, you basically can just do that. You could run around with using Ember if you don't like blood transfusion or feel that forcing bleed is gimmicky. To each their own, do what you want to do, but that's what I did. And you want to get this crit, right? If you got just these two, or if you got Colms and you have those 2 rings, you're sitting at 17% increased crit. Once you get the Amulet of the Waning Moon, that one we just put on, right? It's more crit, it's more spell power, and it's more mana. It's literally everything we love, right? And so this means that we're now sitting somewhere, we're at 22% increased critical chance. So with 22% critical chance just flat, we actually get to do some fun things in our build, right? Or things that we're doing in our build to sort of like help sustain our mana become more effective. And then obviously, this eventually takes and, becomes a thing when your mana outpaces your health. That should be fairly often if you're um, pushing your spirituality as your main ability. And so that just kind of covers all of that, with the exception of this. I'm not actually using the Call of the Waning Moon. Endgame is the Queen's Crown. And then the rather than the Spell Slinger's hat, I think this is one of the few pieces, right? So obviously the gloves, I use the Waning Moon, and then the helm, I do not use the Spell Slinger's hat, I use the Battle Mage hood, right? I believe you get that out of the Tomb of the Good Druid, where you're going to get the Merlin's Thorn anyway, right? So and then so super early game gear looks like this. Waning Moon, right? And then this, right? So if we look at that stat-wise, without anything, we're at 23% magical crit, right? And spell power's at 129%. Not bad, right? And then if we, move our spirituality up, it just goes up from there, right? And obviously, our mana cranks up pretty good, right? So, oh, we committed that. We weren't supposed to do that. Ooh, load it. Go on, be faster. Awesome. Alright, so that covers the gear. This is our endgame setup, right? Archdruid, Royal, and then we would actually switch this out for Royal after a weight reduction on those. Plus, these can all be upgraded. That would crank your stuff. I'm not going to make any changes to this for the moment, just to sort of showcase it, and then show you what the show sort of like what that looks like in upgrades. Loadout is pure mage. You can literally choose whatever you want to do, whatever's fun for you. I used Thunder Lash for a long time. This is actually really fun to pair up with the way we spec up the build, as like Thunder Lash on one and then Flicker Strike on the other. I think it's Flicker Strike, but it comes from the Alchemist in Horns of the South. And blood life transfusion versus blood transfusion. You can turn things into cheese. You can run summons. It does like if you crank your spirituality, you have enough mana, you can run summons. I was able to run summon like 4 battle mages, right? I was able to run a Brock of Mela and 4 battle mages, and still able to heavy cast my Scorching Ray or Scorching Blaze. However, that it did nuke my mana pool small enough that I could only do one of these, and then the mana that refunded from critting on this then allowed me to use a Merlin's Thorn, right, and full charge that, which then popped off for a full mana reset, right? Basically, it returned a ton of mana, right, and filled my mana bar, which allows me to then use the full, a powerful or a charged up Scorching Blaze and repeat that process, one then the other, one the other. Whereas I couldn't ever, hold both of them in power, right? Which is something that you can do if you don't use the skeletons. So play whatever you want. If you like the skeletons, I'll explain sort of the way that I would build that skeleton tree, or the summon tree. But overall, you don't need it. You get enough damage in this game, and you get enough damage out of being a caster anyway, that it's not required. It's basically, if you want to do summons and you want to lean into summons, by all means do that. If you want to use summons to sort of supplement your casting, that also works. It does have some drawbacks and some resource management that you have to sort of figure out how you do that and how you want to do that. It's not my preferred gameplay. So these are my two main spells: the Scorching Blaze and the Merlin's Thorn. The Scorching Blaze and the Thunder Lash both come from Act 1 Fort, and that's where I got them. Merlin's Thorn comes from, I think, Tomb of the Good Druid, and then Life Transfusion. I forget where I picked all these up. Blood Transfusion you get right out of the Insane Asylum. Yeah, the Asylum. And then, obviously, the Skellies are different summons you just pick up as you go. And so if that's not, you can do Fire or Frost, doesn't matter. There are some drawbacks to using Thunder damage in the setup. And though they're not inhibiting, right? They're not like crazy silly, like crazy negative, right? And you could effectively still do it without it, right? It still works. So, with that being said, let's get into specking him. So, the first thing, right? Why is this at 69? Oh, it is 69, and the other one's at 70, right? Yeah, perfect. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is I'll explain what I did, right? When I did this, I didn't have a whole bunch of crit, obviously. Didn't think that this really made sense because I was using the same spell, right? Since this requires you to sort of like alternate spells, or at the very least alternate whether it's a heavy cast or a light cast, which didn't make sense because I was using blood transfusion early and I sort of wanted to make a drain tank type thing. It didn't work out really well, so that just didn't come to fruition. And since I wasn't doing that, there was no point in utilizing those, right? And then I tried to use skeletons to supplement my spell damage, so I picked this up, got 8% here, came here, got my limit, right? Now this is 6 points to get me 40% damage, right? And it does also get me, 5 times 5, right? 25% mana regen, right? So the mana regen is not terrible, right? But I don't think it outweighs, right? I don't think it's worth 2 points. I don't think 25% mana regen is worth the 2 points, right? Along with the hassle of micromanaging those summons. I also found that when I fought things that were more difficult, they died more often, so you end up sort of being sort of forced into worthy sacrifice, and then eventually into mana infused blood, which means that you probably need to max this out to get as much mana regen as possible, which then translates to their health regen, which then translates to one of them dying, basically healing a bunch of the others, right? And then getting a summon that dies, and then giving yourself when you get a killing blow. So you basically, if you're going to run this tree, right? If you want to run summons, right? You really probably want to invest just into the entirety of the thing, right? The whole thing, because otherwise it hurts, right? And they eventually become sort of like micromanagey. My battle mages, I never spec'd into like the bottom stuff, right? I never made them super tanky, right? And the battle mages that I summoned were able to do most things, but once I got into a boss fight or like the stalker, right, showed up, he would sort of engage them, right? But they would never engage him, and he would just murk them, right? And so I spent more time summoning them back, right, and fighting him. And the only point on this tree that I think, if you were playing a pure summoner, that or you were heavily invested in summoner, the only point I probably would never get is this last one, because of the amount of spirituality you would probably be using in order to push your mana pool up, right? And this then makes spirituality, if if this makes spirituality every point, right, force the summon to cost 7% more, then if you had 30 spirituality, does the summon then cost 210% more to cast? That's silly, right? I would never do that. All right, so this is probably the only one the only one I would just skip. The way this would probably actually work is like pushing a bunch of mana battery, right? Pushing your mana up as much as you can, and then using base level, base summons that are just silly or crazy, right? Or limiting yourself to 3, right? So you don't go for a big limit, you go for a better summon, right? So this is sort of like a quality versus quantity thing. So that's enough about Summoner. This is how we sort of build it. So the goal here is that we're basically going to do it kind of sort of like point by point, like how we would do it. And the idea is that we're aiming at 20 to leave or to be done with Act 1. So we're going to start at like 19 to 20 points. With that being said, it's more than likely that if you're exploring the areas, right, and you're going all over the place, right, and really just exploring the whole thing, you're probably not leaving Act 1 until you're level 30, right? If you are leaving at 20 and you think you've explored the whole thing, I promise you haven't, right? There's way too much stuff in these maps, especially in Act 1, right, to leave that early. But if you remember, on the Summoner, we spent 6 points to get 40% increase, and here we can spend 4, right? So we don't have to. Now, I don't think you need that, right? I didn't need that, especially if you are going to use blood transfusion to sort of continuously bleed people. This is a lot more unnecessary, but I like to get the initial spell power, which you have to get. Come down here to get the criticals, do damage to your spells, and then get the chance to stun, right? Now the chance to stun, it'll happen every once in a while, but this can especially early, this can be pretty impactful and save your life a lot, right? Now we're not critting enough to really make Arcane Mark viable yet. However, obviously we should not be doing a double transfusion unless we are bleeding. If we are bleeding, then skip this and go into, like something like mana battery, right? But if you are using, say, Ember, then, and blood transfusion simultaneously, one of them does cost more and one of them costs less, and so getting these 2 points set up like this basically allows you to crank your crit and crank the damage that the other one does. So ideally you're charging Ember and you're tapping on your blood transfusion, right? And this is actually a really potent combo, right? And even without cranking your spell power, this will be plenty. Now, because we're getting 50% crit through this node, whenever we have charged an ability, right, it gives the next one 50% crit. That means that we now want to make sure and get the mana battery function, which is right here, right? We want to get here and get these two. And what that does is makes it so that we're now regenerating our mana. So at this point we're level 11, maybe level 12. Hopefully, we're probably not into the like good druid stuff, so we probably don't have Merlin's Thorn yet. If you were really following the guide and you went straight for the gear, right, looked it up where it was, right, and you just jump straight to it, right, and you're already in Spell Slinger at this point and arguably moving towards the good druid and the fort, right, and getting like thunder, using Thunder Lash probably, right, and Merlin's Thorn, right. So if you're already there, then you are cruising with this stuff, right? Thunder Lash is probably your better option in AoE early, rather than the Scorching Ray or Scorching Blaze. Scorching Blaze is more of like a single target, so you might set that up where you're using Merlin's Thorn in one, and then you have Scorching Blaze on one and Thunderer on 2, right? So one's an AoE, one single target. But once you have this, we don't have enough crit and killing them or return on kill. This is sort of like an early game function that could make sense, but if you're critting and you're using Merlin's Thorn the, as the crit one, right? If you've got those 2 rings and the neck, you're at 22%, 23% crit, and then we're adding 50, so we're already at like almost 75% crit with Merlin's Thorn, right? So as long as we're making sure that Merlin's Thorn is the one that we're trying to use for the crit, what that'll create is that Merlin's Thorn is then being our mana battery, or giving us mana back. And because it shoots 7 times if we overcharge it, right, then it returns it returns more mana than it basically cost. Even though it's only getting 50%, it's like each one of the projectiles returns 50% of what the whole thing costs, right? So you end up getting like 350% mana or something like that. So it's absolutely nuts. It's great mana battery, right? So we don't need to kill things to do it. All we need is a health bar to hit, right? And so we don't need this, or I don't take this, right? You could get this one. However, like I said, if you're using, you shouldn't be in low mana situations because we are sort of battering ourselves with this. It's possible that you get down there and then it procs, right? So it can be good, but I'd rather not rely on conditionals. The movement speed multiplier is there, and since we're staying in the light armor as much as we can, we should always have that. And then the unbound movement, right? This is sort of up to you. It's more of a utility and whether you like it, right? I generally wait to get it. And then I don't really fancy anything else, right? I don't care about out of combat regen because I'm regenning in combat through doing damage. I don't care about mana on kill because of the same reason. I don't care about mana for dead bodies because of the same reason. I don't care about, magic feedback. Just doesn't make any sense to get to me to get any of the rest of these, with the exception of this stamina thing, right? And then Eldritch Desperation is possible to like sort of pick up as a just in case, right, later. But I like to be as consistent as possible. Now, since we have basically everything we need, right, out of just these trees, now for defense, right, probably we're gonna go into it's not that, it's in practicality, right? So we can have, it can be hard, like when you have the battle mage gear and stuff like that, that it can be hard to get this light enough, right? And you don't really want to spend that gold, right? Unless you're doing something cheesy, at which point I'm not talking to you, right? But if you're trying to save gold, or you're not gold rich yet, right? Then these 4 points save you so much, right? Because now you can actually put on all the pieces, right? Or close to all the pieces, right? And it gives you way more leeway in how heavy you can be. And then from there, we're pretty set, right? Defensively, we're not critting. We do have 80% crit. We're level 12 here, and I pick these up, right? We've got practicality, and then you can do, if you want to do some cheesy things, but I like to get this extra dash, right? And that sort of gets us to right around, what is it? Will be 18, right? So getting the extra dash. If you want to be, if you want to be sort of gimmicky and or you're having trouble and you want to be more tanky, you can also get stealth and go here with invisibility. This gives you invisibility if you were gonna die. It basically gives you a cheat death. You can do the same thing with the red death. When you get that, you can put this in here, and this gives you another cheat death. And you can do the same thing with another one in the King Soul. So you can get yourself just naturally super tanky, just in general, with multiple cheat deaths. It's a thing that's possible. If that's what you want to do, by all means, but not how I'm playing it. So we're level 18, give or take, somewhere around there. And we have defensive stuns, right? We are draining stamina, right? On our crits, we should be critting about 75% of the time with Merlin's Thorn, right? And I think we'll only be at 20, somewhere around 22% of the time elsewise, right? Now, that does mean that we're probably about ready we should be somewhere around 15, maybe headed to 20 spirituality, and then starting to put into perception. And that means that we're then cranking our crit naturally anyway, which means that that crit value becomes a little bit more important. So from there, we then get to sort of like crank our damage, right? If at any point in time, right, if you don't care about the stun, by all means crank your damage, right? But the next set of points that I do, right, so this starts into Act 2, right, is push this as hard as possible, right? And then, because we should be getting perception levels, we should start becoming a little more consistent with our crits, and we do have Merlin's Thorn going, right, pretty consistently, which means we now get at least, one crit every 10 seconds, almost guaranteed. So now we are going to be putting in Arcane Mark, right, which is basically gives us the enemy taking 30% more damage. And then here we're going to head for Elemental Focus, right? Now the reason we're not as worried about imbibe the elements. If we're using Thunderlash, this doesn't matter, right? Because there's no like shock function in the game. Thunder doesn't have an element that it puts on it, so this is basically restricted and bleeds, right? So doing like siphon of a bleed doesn't put the bleed element on it. So this doesn't add a status in neither of those two add a status. So the only thing that gets affected by this is fire spells and chill spells, fire and frost. With that being said, that's also why this elemental infusion doesn't make sense early. Arguably doesn't make sense at all because we're probably nothing's probably ever going to live long enough to have a status on it that then allows us to do more of that type of damage. And similar with Overkill, right? Overkill's nice, and we're actually going to get Overkill here, even though it's not super necessary. So if you have something else you want to do with this, right, by all means, right? What I do like this for is when there is a group or when there are two people and I hit them with a big old scorching blaze, right? And I basically get double AoE, right? So if I blew up one, right, and he explodes, right, and the Scorching Blaze did its explosion in the area, right, I basically get both those explosions on the next guy and potentially kill him as well, right? But outside of that, like there aren't enough situations where you have 15 mobs together unless you're specifically hoarding them and kiting them around and getting them all grouped up, right? Which would be hilarious. But so we'll get that, but it's more just sort of like a fun or extra utility, right? And since we're in utility, we're now going to go ahead and get our mana. You don't have to get mana, right? I'm going to get this point here, right? It's not necessary if you don't like it. And mana you can crank if you want, right? Or you can leave it, right? So like we've already got most of the basics done. What I like to do is I like to add mana from this point, or add mana from this part of the tree, as needed, right? So like if I've got, let's say I can only do one of my charged up scorching blazes, right? And I just don't have enough mana to be able to push a second charged up scorching blaze out in my rotation. Then I might add a bit of mana until I can do two, if that's possible, if it's close enough, right? If not, right? Or if I can do that, or I'm happy with my rotation and I don't feel like I need to eke out more, then this is when we start really investing in crit, right? So the way I like to do the crit tree is with one here, right? Well, now we're not a melee build, so we don't care about increasing our stamina fully off of crits. And then I get the Aegis, right? I like to get 2 there and 2 here, right? This helps make us tankier, and this helps make us heal off of our damage, right? We get consecutive crit or crit cascade, basically as an unlock because it allows us to get here rather than anything else. And then we're gonna load up, right? We're gonna load up here, and then we're gonna load up. We don't load up in deep wounds, but we do load up here, right? And what that does is this gives us spell power because of our movement speed, gives us spell power bonus, right? This gives us flat crit, which is 6, right? So our base was 23 before, right? If we're in Act 2, we get to add 5 to that, right? So we're at 28, and now we get to add 6 here, so we're at 34, right? Our base is 34, right? So we're at basically a 1 in 3 is going to crit, right? Which means that we're likely critting with our fireball more often as well, because and then also critting with the Merlin's Thorn because it does 7 and then rotating around, right? And the Merlin's Thorn is getting extra damage or extra crit rate from the these 2 notes, right? Where it's the lesser cost, so it gets the crit. So it just sort of like moves together really, really well and synergizes really well. And this makes it so that we basically heal off damage, so we almost never have to worry about health potions. Right? We're almost never worrying about those things at all. Right? And we're cranking damage. We're pretty set here. Right? Now, it's 23 points from 69. Gets us, we're somewhere in 40, we're in 46, right? So we're probably at the end of Act 2 now, right? Or mid Act 2, depending on when you left Act 1, right? So now, again, we're gonna add mana as necessary, right? So feel free to add this whenever you want. But now we're just really sort of gonna push the boundaries of this damage that we can do, right? We've already got this. We can add in we should be much higher in crit. We should now have our royal gear. If we've increased if we've upgraded that gear, we've also increased our crit as well. So now we're going to operate on the idea that we're in the high 80s to 90s on crit, somewhere around there, right? Or moving that way. Right, which means that crit damage now becomes way more important, right? And it becomes way more valuable, right? The higher our crit goes beyond 50, the more crit damage actually is weighted, right? And then we'll just go ahead and put these points in, right? Now, obviously, like I said, you put these points in as necessary. We're gonna put them in now. All right, just for the sake of like we're going towards the finishes of the build. All right, so with this as necessary, this is super important for damage, right? Because of our crits beyond 50%, and then now we get into these are the special things to push the damage beyond the normal limits, right? Beyond the just sort of like it's out here. It just makes sense type limits. All right, so the first one is we actually go into strength, right? We go into the general area, and because we are doing so much crit damage, right? We are taking so much stamina off of enemies, both bosses, etc., right? And this is our opener. Typically, our opener is hitting 45% stronger, which in theory is hopefully also infused, right? If our infused opener, right, hits them and crits, assuming we're close to somewhere around 100% crit, we are basically going to delete their stamina bar, which means they stagger, right? And if they stagger, then we can get these 3 points, which makes it so that they take 60% increased damage. Now, because we crit them in the spirituality tree down here, they're already taking 30% more. Now they take another 60% more, which means we're at 90%. And then we're going to make sure that we pick this up. This is the last one, right? So we'll put that in last. We go to practicality, and in theory, dexterity is probably faster, or it's probably more bang for your buck, right? It's 4 points. We're going to go into bows. We don't care about the bows, but what we do care about is marksman. This is 100% damage based off distance. So as long as you are able to maintain a long distance away from the enemy, right? I'm assuming by now your stuff is happening mostly at range. There's basically nothing ever coming into melee, and if it does, it's just to fall over, right? And give you your loot at its feet. Most things are probably at range, just blowing up and disappearing into the distance or into the sky. Right? So this just allows you to do that even harder, right? And this also basically doubles the damage on the opener of a boss, etc. Right? It just makes you basically do double damage, right? And it's a separate multiplier, I think, because it is conditional, right? And so like the entirety of the fireball should have to be calculated before finding out whether or not that's increased by whatever range that is. And I don't know if this is dynamic. I don't know if you can like throw it and then run away and get more damage out of it. But this is pretty big thieves. And then we go over to practicality. Now we're going to eat into statuses, right? So when they have a status on them, right, they're going to have 30% more damage, right? So that means we're going to add in this, deep wounds, which means we now add statuses all the time. And we pick up this, right? We can add, let's see, what do we got here? We can eventually add Rising Scourge, right? Which makes it easier to add statuses. But again, I don't think anything's going to live long enough for that to matter. The potent poisons, we're not worried about this. We don't need to increase our debuffs. Our debuffs are just there to increase our other damage. And then we could, this would be decent at helping apply these statuses faster when they already have one, right? Which at this point, if we are operating at 100% crit, we no longer need this, right? And in theory, you probably don't need to stun, right? So I'm going to take 10% stun away, right? You could go down to here, but it's kind of nice to have it. But like this is 20%, 40%. If this went to 60%, I probably wouldn't take it away. But the second one is, it's not as great, right? And in theory, you don't have to put it in earlier, right? And so we're going to bring that over, and we're going to put it in here. And so now every time we hit, we should be. Oh, we also got to get this point. Oh, yeah, we're going to pull it out of here. We're going to pull it out of our mana extra, right? Because this is our as needed, right? Our as needed section. So doing this, when we hit with fireball, we are applying burn, or at least applying the burning like build up, right? Which hopefully we're doing enough damage to just basically apply burn outright, right? If we crit, we have a 50% chance to apply bleed. If we apply either of the statuses, we make it easier to apply the next status, and they take 30% more damage, and another 30%, they take 30% more damage for having one, and if they have both of them, they take another 30. So since we were already at 30% more damage and 60% more damage, right? We're at 90%. Now we're at 120. Now we're at 150. So when they have two statuses on them, and they're staggered, they're taking 150 50% more damage, and if we are X, you know, the farther away we are, if we're at max distance, right, then we're getting double that damage. You know, that damage is doubled before it hits them. All right, so this is like all of our damage that we've already set up is calculated, and then we throw it, right, and then it gets a multiplier at 1.6, and then that gets another multiplier at like 2.5 because it gets 150% more increased damage taken from us because of his statuses, right? So this thing just absolutely nukes, and we didn't have to get skeletons. If you added in, if you wanted to be really ridiculous, you could add in those 6 points again, right? And pick these up, and then do some like really cheap summon, right? And that ideally just stays out of the way. And you could add another 40% spell power on top of that, and then if you cranked this up, you could add in some mana, some pretty monstrous mana regen, right? Now you'd end up going to like 70 something, which would probably take some dedicated farming in order to get that high in levels before you ended the game, but it's possible, and that would be absolutely silly. Now note, right, that doesn't include any of the Red Death stacking stuff, right? So this isn't like this tree can provide you a pretty quick boost to 200% increased damage, right? Like it's a lot. It's more stacking, right, oriented, but you can like supercharge the stacking functions with crits and regular damage, and then this, right? And if you added in all that, right, you get another 200%. So you can really make this game just kind of go nuts. And then here are the attributes. These are actually way simpler than the rest of it, right? The first thing you're going to do is you're going to crank your spirituality. If you want to wear the waning moon stuff, you're going to go to 6 endurance, right? If you don't need the waning moon because you went straight for spellslinger and you didn't have to worry about it, just keep cranking, right? I like to get to 15 before I get to the 6, right? And then we should be somewhere, you know, this should give us what, we're level 21, something like that. We should be headed into Act 2. So when we get to Act 2, I'm headed for 20. And what this does is basically makes it so like there's not a speech check that has spirituality on it, right? If there's a speech check that says, hey, you might be able to do this specific thing if you have enough spirituality, right? If I have 20, I think we basically pass all of those, or can access all of those. So that's what we do there. I go here to 10 because I like even numbers, and 6 is a little weird, right? But it's more for the encumbrance limit. I think this gets me to like 205, right? Depending on like different buffs from shrines and whatnot. Yeah, 205. Haha. It already did the math for me. I didn't need to do it up there. And then at this point, right, we're sitting somewhere around 39. We're at 40%, right? And so we're gonna crank perception, right? And we're basically just gonna invest in perception. Now that gets us to 81. I don't want to go quite that high, right? Because so we'll come back down to like, let's take 15, right? So this is pretty good for even if you were leaving Act 2, right? You're at 20 spirituality, you've got 235 mana, 234 HP. You won't have quite that much because I have 70 HP increase from permanent buffs. But you know, you're running around with 205 for your weight limit. You're still in light armor, right? You have 235 on your mana pool, right? And you're sitting somewhere around 90% crit rate, right? Now let's look at this. Yep, this is all. Yep, that's right. Okay, so now our 90% crit rate, we just want to basically get to 100, right? So we're gonna push this to there, 100. That gives us 350% crit damage. Now, naturally, once you're at 100% crit, right, crit rate damage becomes super, super important, right? Like ultra um, valuable, right? However, we want to have the mana to cast our spells. If you're comfortable, right, and you like your thing, you can ignore cranking, like turning up spirituality, and just crank this up even further, and get this to like 500 crit damage, right? I think that's what that would cap out somewhere. So we could get somewhere around 435 with my skill points, right? But rather than get that, you know, what is that, 80 something, 85, right? I'm going to get, or I'm going to push this. So we go 276, 30, that gets 294, right? And 37 gets us there. So let's do 35, 27, right? We can do something like that. We'll just do this for easy sake, right? So now we're just under 300% spell power. We have 336 mana. We're going to have almost 20 mana regen per second. And we have 100% crit with 350% crit rating. Or crit damage, right? Now, these numbers change, right? Depending on your gear, right? If you have upgraded this gear and it has significantly more crit rating, you won't need as much in perception in order to hit the 100%. You may still want to push perception for the crit damage, but that's entirely up to you and how you sort of want to make that work, right? And now last but not least is the way I like to do the King Soul. I have 4 already here because of, what's his name, Lancelot, right? So Lancelot's the first one, then the different souls we picked up. So the first one, if you want to do the cheat death, pick up this, right? Fully automatic. Whenever you receive lethal, this goes off regardless of whether it's charged. If you have even a shred of this available, right, this will go off. So that's a thing you can pick up, right, for that. I like to not do that because it feels sort of gimmicky. So I like to pick up 400% more. I like to pick up the regenerates a portion, right? So those two together. And then I like to have it do damage you deal during that thing, during the King Soul, happens twice. And then I like to do just an increase on that damage, right? Since I don't have mana problems, I don't, or resource problems, I don't need to use the resource fixer. And I already have things restore, like kills potentially restoring the King Soul anyway, and I generally don't ever use it, right? It's sort of fun to use on like a boss, but if you use this on a boss, right, assuming the boss can live through your normal rotation, right, it's literally gonna just, like, you're gonna get it to like half health or 30% health, and then it's just gonna, like, your King Soul will run out and it'll fall over. Or maybe you detonate your King Soul by turning it off, right, and it falls over. So that's how I set up the King Soul setup, and that's basically universal for all builds or all my characters, unless I'm doing something like super melee or super risky, right? And then I might do the cheat death function. So if we bring this out, right? Obviously, so I'm using the subpar, gloves, right? And everything else is right, but it's not upgraded, right? So this is the base, this is the worst version of the end game gear possible, right? So if we come out here and we start picking fights, oh, there's not enough people here. We'll go down to go up to the Sven tribe. Go, shut up. You know what? There we go. Now we don't have to worry about you. So now, the hard part about this as a demonstration is you kind of have to, it's not going to show you the sneak damage, right? Because he's technically not ready for you, or in combat already. Bonk. He's staggered because of stamina, as you can see it building back up. And we're back up, right? So, everything sort of happens this way, right? Doesn't matter really what enemy it is, right? You come over here, hit that one, like this, bop, dead. That one, dead. Right? And you just rotate between the two. And you're just constantly refilling your mana, you're constantly throwing out damage, you're constantly staggering them because you're doing so much damage. You're potentially stunning them as well. This lady, I think we can get a sneak crit on. Boom, right? She's just gone. She's instant deleted, right? This guy, we're gonna do a rotation on, right? So we're gonna enter here. So we're gonna go bop. We're gonna let him heal if he needs to. Nope, he's a bitter boss, right? One, he's instant staggered. Come over here, give us our mana back. Wait for it. We're gonna let him drink. He's instant staggered. We're gonna get our mana back. Do you have another drink? Don't charge me. Okay, you go bye-bye. Yep, staggered again. Well, bye. Right? And it's just over, right? Like, that's all she wrote. And that puts us right at an hour, so I'll leave it there. If you have any questions or you have any builds that, concept ideas that you have in your head, or that you have a build that you want to see me set up and create, or if you want to see something like a playthrough of how I get through the game with one of these builds, by all means let me know, and we will catch you later.